Hello, I'm Micah Zevin. Welcome to the Queens Library, Ridgewood. Today's our author talk features the writer Tejas Desai. Indie author Tejas Desai, founder of the New Wave literary movement, has been profiled in the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, and other outlets. He's the author of the best-selling international crime trilogy, The Brotherhood Chronicle, and Good Americans, which Kirkus Reviews praise as a solid collection of rare caliber that speaks volumes about the human condition and modern life in America. Please join us for a reading and a discussion of his latest work, Bad Americans Part 1, an ambitious novel exploring COVID-19 pandemic has shaped communities in Queens. Please give a big Ridgewood Library round of applause for Tejas Desai, everyone.
Thanks so much, Micah. I'm Tejas Desai. I'm the author of several books, but my latest book is Bad Americans Part 1, which came out in September, and it's done great. I want to talk about my inspiration for the book, writing the book. It's actually a really unique book, and I'm really proud of it. This is actually a book set during the COVID pandemic. I started writing it during the lockdown, and it's really a reflection of that time in all its complexity and contradictions. It is about a billionaire businessman who's a dating app magnate named Olive Mixer. He basically creates a competition during the lockdown for where 12 diverse Americans are selected to come to his mansion complex in the Hamptons, and they each are able to eat extravagant cuisine, do great activities, date each other, but during this process they also have to tell a story each night. And so within the novel, there are days where the characters are interacting, and then there are evenings when they're telling a story. So there are actually 12 stories in the two books. There's Part 1, Bad Americans Part 1, which came out in September, and there's Bad Americans Part 2, which is coming out in April. And within that, each book, there are 6 stories told by each character, and there's also the frame narrative in which there's drama involved too. And one of my greatest challenges was how to make this book riveting and readable, and with all these disparate elements. Based on all the people who read it, all the reviews, I did a pretty good job. So that was my greatest challenge. And it was actually an idea that came to me about 20 years ago when I was studying abroad at the university, or more than 20 years ago, it was almost 25 years ago, studying abroad at the University of Oxford, and I really started reading the Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio in depth, and I really got this idea, well, one day I want to write something like this, a story, a collection where there are stories told by the characters in the book, and there's a frame narrative. I tried to write my stories within stories during that time. I've been writing fiction since I was 8 years old, and that was a challenge for me. But I don't think I did it so well at that time. So I thought, well, when I'm good enough to do this, I'm going to do it, or at least try to do it. And then zip along about to 2019 or so. I had written already 4 books, and I was publishing my other book series, the Brotherhood Chronicle, which is an international crime trilogy set in New York City, India, Thailand, and Australia, and that getting a lot of buzz. And I published a second edition. I published the first book in 2012, The Brotherhood. 2018, I published the second edition, and then 19 and 20, The Running High and The Answer of Death were coming out. So by 2019, I was thinking about my next project, and I came back to this idea because I had another book, Good Americans, which was published in 2013. That was part of the Human Tragedy series, and that was kind of like a short story collection series where I was going to describe American society. And so the first book was a little bit more conventional. It had 6 short stories, a 3-part novella, provocative, kind of fictional introduction. And so it was not typical because it was a lot longer than most collections and a lot grittier than most collections, but it was still had the form of a typical short story collection. And so for the second one in this series, I really wanted to challenge myself, and I came back to the idea of having the frame narrative and the characters. And my initial idea, and I look back at my notes in late 2018, 2019, it was to have about 10 characters quarantined in a library, telling stories about a pandemic, and this was a fictional pandemic that they were escaping. And so I had this idea, and I realized I really couldn't start serious work on it until late 2020, when The Dance Towards Death, the last book of the Gallery Chronicle, was published, and that ended up winning like 15 literary honors. So I'm really proud of that book as well. But when I when I was thinking about writing it, then obviously the actual pandemic happened. It also affected me personally greatly because I got sick in January 2020. I had to cancel my trip abroad. I was sick for like 6 weeks and as soon as I got back, we had to lock down. And now I realize it was probably COVID, so all the symptoms matched, but no one knew it was in the United States at that time.
Right. You didn't end up on a respirator.
Yeah.
I think that's the...
Yeah. Yeah, and then also my mom worked at Elmer's Hospital. She got the virus. We all got it. My dad was very sick. I knew people who passed away from it, who were, especially elderly people. And so, this is something that affected me personally deeply. But then I also reached out to a lot of people who it affected, and there were people who were I got the idea of, first I changed it from a library to the Hamptons because I saw what was happening. A lot of the rich people were going to the outer areas, the Hamptons, upstate. So I got this idea of what if there was like a billionaire who was kind of living this lavish lifestyle, but he called all these people from different walks of life to the mansion. So they would be interacting, and they would be having these conflicts based on their background, their political beliefs, their lifestyles, their worldviews, their classes, whatever it might be, their professions especially. And then they would also tell these stories, and so that would give you an even deeper lens into their lives and how America was different, life was different for each person based on their backgrounds and experiences. So that's how I got the initial idea. But then I was like, well, let me delve more deeply into this. So let's say one person is a nurse, or one person is a model, or one person is a lawyer, or one person is a soldier. How would they experience the world? How would they experience the pandemic? So I reached out to a lot of people who either I knew or I might have gone to college with. One of the things, I went to a liberal arts college, so a lot of people followed different paths, and even people I knew from when I was younger. So them, and maybe they referred me to somebody else. But anyway, eventually I got to talk to all these other different people, and I also got a lot of people to read the stories themselves as I was writing them and give me feedback. And there were substantial changes in a couple of stories that happened based on that. So I wrote the stories, I wrote the frame narrative. I actually looked back recently at my first draft, and it was, I think, 375,000 words, which is the length of 4 novels plus one long novella, so it was way too long, way too detailed. Much of that was the frame storage. I had to cut down a lot. But in any case, the stories took about 2-3 rewrites. Frame narrative I had a little bit more difficulty with because I wanted to make it compelling enough that people would read it, but not so perfectly crafted as the short stories. So that took a little bit of work, but ultimately, it came out, and I'm really happy about it. So I'm gonna read a little bit from the book so you get a sense of how it works. It's a very unique book in the way that it works. So I'm going to give you first one of the quotes from the beginning of the book, which is actually a quote from Walt Whitman. And it was written around the time of the Civil War, and he's really talking about the national division at the time, but also about how human beings are so divided. So here's the quote. "What is any nation, after all, and what is any human being, but a struggle between conflicting, paradoxical, opposing elements? And they themselves in their most violent contests, important parts of that one identity and its development." Walt Whitman. So it's within this quote, it really, I think, defines what how the novel is, even though he's talking about, a period, that's like 150 plus years ago. He's talking about a nation is always filled with these conflicting, paradoxical, opposing elements. And he's also talking about even within a human being, that's true. And you'll see, within the characters of this book, they initially are kind of defined as almost being archetypes or stereotypes. But as you read the book, you realize they're all very complicated. And their stories reflect that, and their personalities reflect that. So I'm going to read a little bit from the very beginning of the book. You get a sense of who's involved in the book and how it works, and then I'll read a little bit from the stories and from the frame narrative and the stories to get a little bit of sense of how that works as well. So from this is the very beginning of the book, Orientation Day, summer 2020. The Americans had arrived in the Hamptons and now stood in the den of the Cycleplex, 12 of them, hanging out in the groups they had naturally formed after arriving and finding their rooms. They were waiting for their host, Olive Mixer, the reclusive billionaire who owned dating apps and had created the competition that had chosen them. They had been locked down by the government for months. Now they hoped to be free. 2 weeks of eating, activities, and dating in a secure environment. Finally, they could forget about the virus and death. They could be among people again. This was the getaway. Sung, head of security, stood at the center of the main den, next to a table filled with hors d'oeuvres. The conservatives were discussing the illegals and the great things the president had done. Meanwhile, the liberals were gossiping about the road to, the quarantine girl, and the skinhead. Sung was thinking about the road to also. He had rapid tested them upon arrival. Both had come directly from Connecticut after quarantining at home and uploading tests. But Nalini, the corporate lawyer, had been driven by her father, so Sung needed to clear it with the two doctors, Alexa and Rashadi, before she could join everyone else. Her father was sitting at a local restaurant nearby for word in case she needed to be sent back. The other 10 had been picked up in limos. 5 had quarantined for 2 weeks in a different complex of bungalows on the North Shore that Olive owned, while the other 5 had self-quarantined at their homes in and around New York City, uploading regular tests. All were tested before they were cleared. Now, they waited for Olive Mixer. They munched on food and drank cocktails served by Aries, one of the house staff. The liberals, lounging on beanies, included Rashawn Hall, an African-American teacher, Lisa Applebaum, a Jewish-American blogger, Kathy Wei Kwan, a Taiwanese-American social worker, and Andrea Mendoza, a Filipino-American nurse. The conservatives clustered around the bar included Taylor Williams, a white financial analyst, Hassan Madashev, a Chechen-American dental hygiene student, Angela Diaz, an Ecuadorian-American hair salon owner, and Sylvania Traynor, an Asian-American transgender seamstress. The skinhead, Ricard Shaw, munched on a cracker alone in the corner near a TV and PlayStation. In another corner by an ornate curtain that was an uncommon pair, Pritesh Lakshmi, an Indian computer engineer, and Haley Clark, a young model. Everyone noticed they seemed to already have a great rapport. Through that curtain on the right side of the den, a man emerged. He was tall and had an olive complexion. He wore a traditional black suit with red tie. In each hand he held a book. One was the Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, the other, the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. He approached the center of the room and placed the books on the table where the hors d'oeuvres had been placed. Suddenly everyone realized the book was already there, but no one had seen it, The Arabian Nights. Olive clapped 2 times, and the second time he held his hands together flat as if he was praying to the crowd or perhaps weighing to them in a time manner. It wasn't clear. Thank you all for coming. I'm Olive Mixer. I'm so happy you decided to be here with us. When this awful pandemic started, I knew it was going to be something we'd never experienced. Not only have we seen so many of our fellow New Yorkers get sick and die, but we've seen life as it was collapse. The isolation, the homeschooling, he said, looking at Rashawn. Even I have lost so many friends, so much that my staff here has become like my family, and you will treat them as such, or I'll hear about it. I'm going to stop there because I want to get to some of the other stuff, but that's a little bit of an introduction to the characters in the book, and then the billionaire as well. You also get to know some of the staff as well, and it's a little bit of upstairs, downstairs too. So, so I'm going to get to one of the character profiles. Basically, each day starts with a bit of an overview of the character telling the story, and then you get the interactions with the other characters, and then you get the story at that night, and then there's also a plot that moves along with that. I'm gonna talk today about Taylor and Rashawn. So Taylor is the third storyteller. He's very conservative, former lieutenant in the military, who did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's a white financial analyst. Lives in Cold Spring, New York, which is upstate. But he also, goes down to the city. And he's actually also, during the pandemic itself, the hardest time, there are food lines in Queens. He was passing out food with one of the celebrity chefs, who's also Giago, who's also on staff. So anyway, he's a kind of a complex character, and you get this beginning of how he wakes up and everything, and then I'll get into a little bit of his story as well. Day 3. Taylor went down to the basement early and got spotted on the bench press by none other than Darnell, who was technically on Big Brother duty in the security office next to the gym. Son was sleeping on a cot in the office. Darnell snuck out. He got lonely all by himself. Haley, the only other person there, was running on the treadmill, so Darnell chatted with her. The night before, Taylor felt things were going well with Angela, but when they approached her room after hanging out, he had awkwardly blown it. "Garino," she had said, "I had a good time tonight." She had kissed him on the cheek and hugged him. He could have kissed her back or said something so she would let him into her room, but he had chickened out. "You'll have another chance, man," Darnell said, "but you can't keep blowing it." Taylor knew he shouldn't be complaining to his competition, but then Darnell seemed to like all the girls, so maybe it was okay. Anyway, Darnell was staff, an essential non-factor. Upstairs, as he was entering his room, Taylor saw the card. He used the letter opener he had in his briefcase to open it. The card said, "Stories can move us, but they can also unnerve us. They can make us open our eyes or close them and reopen them anew. Think about what you want the audience to experience and give it to them tonight like a special brew." "Sure, I'll give it to them," Taylor thought. He would counter Kathy's story for sure, finally give them a conservative voice, correct the wrongs uttered, even if it was brutal and not popular. He didn't have to be popular, but he did want to win. So that's just an example. He's a third storyteller. So the first 2 stories was Andrea's story, which was kind of like a ER and steroids story about the hospital battle against COVID in Elmhurst Hospital. And Kathy's story was like a spoken word poem as story about an undocumented immigrant and her struggles with anti-Asian discrimination and undocumented immigrant discrimination. So it was a very kind of liberal story. The first 2, both of them, more the second one. So he wants to counter this with this quote-unquote conservative story. So his story is about an Ecuadorian family. He talks about, in his introduction, he talks about Ecuadorian immigrants in Corona and how they're, conservative and righteous or something. So anyway, this is just an example of his story, and just read, a few paragraphs from it so you get a sense of it. Day 3, Taylor's story, aka Corona KS. And by the way, all the stories have 2 names. One is that person's story, and they also has a story name. A man named Xavier Zambrano immigrated from Ecuador to Queens through his much older brother, Eduardo, waiting over 20 years to come legally. His family owned a farm back in Guayas province, but he made his living as an agricultural engineer. When he immigrated to the U.S. with his family, he lived briefly with his brother in his modest home in Corona. But given that can-do American spirit, he immediately decided to make his own living and branch out. His brother Eduardo owned an Ecuadorian restaurant in Corona, and Javier's wife Anna worked there as a waitress. Javier's 2 children were very young, and he wanted to bring them up as strict Catholics. So he borrowed money from his brother and sent them to Catholic school. He rented his own apartment in a 3-story home in Queens, and he bought a medallion by by borrowing money from the bank, which allowed him to work as a taxi driver. This was in 2013, when medallions were nearly $1 million, and right before Uber became big in New York City. As you might imagine, as the years went on, Javier eked out a living, but he regretted his decision to get a medallion when he could have just waited and become an Uber driver. In debt to the bank and too proud to ask Eduardo for more financial help, he decided his only bet was to keep driving. As the years passed, his brother Eduardo got sick of New York City. He was much older. His kids had graduated from college, and his wife had passed on years before. He decided to sell his restaurant and his house. He moved to North Carolina's Outer Banks, where he bought a cheaper house, lived off his investments, and settled into a peaceful life. As a favor, the new owner of the restaurant kept the current staff, and thankfully, Anna retained her job. Now, around 2016, some illegal Mexican gangs became prominent in one part of Corona and Western Flushing. They wanted to expand their money-making ventures. Associated with El Chapo, they would stop at nothing to sell their product. One of the gang's leaders, Hector Lopez, set up a shop in a house next to Javier's. He noticed Javier would park his cab nearby in the evening and take it out in the morning. He got an idea. The cab would be an ideal way to transport their product without being suspected. Hector befriended Javier, acting like a concerned fellow Hispanic who would look after Javier's wife and kids, protecting them from gangs and other predators. Of course, he was buttering up Javier for the kill. One day, Hector was in his cab getting a friendly free ride to work, quote unquote, in Woodside, when he got Javier to pull over in a deserted spot and stuck him up with a gun. His amigos came out of the woodwork and surrounded the cab, armed too. Javier was forced to agree to transport Hector's product from his home, where it arrived through Mexico after a circumvented route to different distribution centers around New York City and Long Island. Javier was a good man, a devout Catholic, but he had a family, so he felt he had no choice but to comply. He knew he was doing the wrong thing. He would pull his taxi over and cry when he was alone, but he didn't know a way to get out of his predicament. Granted, Hector did pay him, but it was a pittance. The real reason he kept doing it was a threat to his family if he veered away from his job even a bit. So it goes on. It's not the longest story. It's pretty short, but it's also very tight. And it's really different from the other two stories, especially the last one, which was a spoken word. It was very funny. It was very kind of cutting. And this is very, very tight. And the atmosphere is completely different too. So just give you an example of how each character influences their story in terms of subject and style, and how that works. Just to give you one more example, this is day 4, and the fourth character is Rashawn. He's a gay elementary school teacher, 3rd grade teacher, and he tells his story is about a librarian who's very similar to himself. So this is day 4 when he wakes up, and you'll get a sense of him. Day 4. Rashawn awoke with a start. He could hear rain pelting against the windows and the sounds of occasional thunder. He dreamt about being in a perpetual whirlpool, the circular waves circling him, twirling him towards a black hole. And no matter how desperately he fought back against the current, he couldn't make gains against the power of the jet stream. As he neared the black hole and whatever its contents or lack thereof portended, he prayed to an invisible god he deemed Poseidon, but only Ares appeared, holding up a palm. It was like how he felt in a relationship with Josh, the white hipster he had lived with until the pandemic hit. He'd always ignored their differences, placed them in the back of his mind, but when the pandemic came, he realized the security he had invented in Josh was a mirror. Josh had returned to the farm in Montana to quarantine, said he even met a woman to settle down with. That was just to please Dad, Rashawn thought. He'd never pictured Josh with a woman, only another man, and that only in his most jealous moments. Josh had given a fig leaf, allowing him to remain in his apartment in Fort Greene to quarantine. But now the lease was ending, and Rashawn had to decide where to go. The pandemic wasn't over yet. Would schools be open? Much would depend on that. Maybe he could live with his mom if he did remote work, but he didn't want to teach remotely. But it was probably the safest option. But even during the lockdown, Rashawn began to wish he was with his mom at bedside, even though he knew she was elderly and that he should avoid her. His sister was living with her husband in New Rochelle. That was the epicenter of the pandemic at one point, and he had been very ill at home. Thankfully, he hadn't died, but many people Rashawn knew had. So this is just the beginning of day 4. So you get a sense of Rashawn and his background, and that kind of proceeds into a bit of plot about him. And then we get his story at that night. So I'm going to read a little bit of the story just so you get a sense of the contrast and similarity. Day 4, Rashawn's story, aka Black Boy's Ballad. Stephen, the black kid from Bed-Stuy. So there was a sensitive kid from Bed-Stuy named Stephen. He was black and he grew up in the hood where no one gave him a chance to express himself. But he stayed true to himself in this macho world, and it was through education and caring teachers that he got a chance to escape that prison of the mind. He earned that BA at Brooklyn College and even went ahead and got his master's at Queens College. He worked full-time, so he took a few years to get that, but not as long as some of these knuckleheads do. And by his late 20s, he was a librarian in a public library in Bushwick. Stephen had struggled with his sexuality. He was too afraid of reprisal to tell anyone while growing up, even while queerness was becoming more accepted. He tried to stay away from that toxic negativity from the gangbangers and the other fools who were dumb enough to play into the white man's prison, literally and figuratively. Stephen did know the deal literally, as his dad was in prison for murder. His father had been a Black Panther in the 70s, and many say that when he joined the Nation of Islam in the 90s, his former brothers, now a bunch of informants, got mad and framed him for killing a cop, when in fact they had done the deed themselves in an inside job. It always made Stephen angry, but he never knew his dad, so he steered clear. His mom had stopped taking him to Sing Sing when he hit puberty. She was a hardworking custodian at the local library, which is how he got to reading and was inspired towards this path. He'd come out to his mom when he was in grad school. She was disappointed, but she had accepted it. He could never tell his old pals from Bed-Stuy. He'd probably cop him. So he just cut all his ties with that world and moved into a tiny apartment in Bushwick that was walking distance from the public library where he worked. And he goes on. That's actually the longest story in the book. It's a novella. It's about 120 pages long, 28,000 words, I think. So, and probably one of the best. They're all pretty good. But so it just gives you a sense of how different the stories are, how they vary based on the people telling them, and also everyone kind of has an agenda also by telling these stories. So in any case, that's what makes the book unique. What makes the book what it is. And so that's part 1, and then part 2 is coming out in April 15th of next year, which I'm really looking forward to. And again, it's got great reviews, great feedback from everybody who's read it. So I don't know if Micah, you have any questions.
Do you want to what's your favorite character or favorite story? I just was going back to this story you did with Stephen and Max. I thought that's a really good one where I really felt like connected to it felt really real, the characters, right. Just sort of that awkwardness of revealing your like you're gonna get engaged or reveal who you are to your family, right. That felt like something that could easily happen, like the Montana aspect of it, and how they're right. Maybe not as narrow-minded as you think, or not all the time anyway.
Right. Yeah.
No, I kind of liked that one a lot because like you could feel what the characters are feeling, and just like the awkwardness and emotional collapse and being surprised by each other's families.
Yeah,
in good and bad ways, of course. But.
Yeah. So the story that Mike was describing is Black Boy's Ballad, the one I was reading from, and it is a very it's a very complicated story because it like I said, it's a novella. So it's a kind of like a gay love story, a queer romance that's complex though in the way that the way race plays out, the way that kind of red versus blue, I guess, in the most simplest sense plays out. And also urban and rural, and the way that they're different from each other. I had somebody read this who was kind of a gay person of color, and they're like, wow, I was really shocked how well you how well you
the contradictions.
the
picked at that.
contradictions and just like how well you kind of got into this character and how
Right.
you would really
They were very
feel.
genuine
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah.
Those
Um,
two especially.
So yeah, it's kind of a heartbreaking love story in one sense, and then there's also this aspect of this mystery suspense story as well, where he gets involved with his father and why he's in prison, and a lot of this kind of conspiracy that's around that, and then you kind of get really into the struggle of African Americans in this country in a unique way, and so it kind of combines these two elements in a way that it's really affecting, I think. And a lot of people do think this is the best story in the book. It's
Yeah,
certainly
just that the
longest, yeah.
dialogue's really tight, and I feel like it's something things they would say.
Mhm.
Like, you know what I mean? Because it's hard. The dialogue is hard in
Yeah.
novels.
Right.
Like, I have a lot of, whenever I have novelists who read in my former reading series, like, some are really good at reading their stuff, some are not. Some is like, okay, you're the feature reader. I read for 5 minutes and then they just stop. And I'm like, no, we're nice here. You get more. You're a
Right,
novelist.
right, yeah.
But, yeah, they're very, I can see these characters.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I don't know if I have a favorite. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a favorite because they're all so different from each other.
Right.
I think, yeah, Black Boys Bell is definitely top. I think probably in some ways it's the best. It's also in the second book, the very last story is called Dope Double Diddy, which is actually a double story. And I'm not going to reveal who does the double
don't.
story, but yeah, that's also a novella, but it's really unique. And I know my mom's favorite story is that one. She read the whole book, so she's like, my favorite because it's a double story and it's so unique and it's not brilliantly done. But anyway,
I can
yeah.
almost see it being like a small television, like a television movie. Oh, it's some parts of that.
Yeah.
I mean, because the dialogue, like.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people say my work is very cinematic. It's very, it's very, most of it is very dialogue heavy. I mean,
Right.
all the stories are different, but yeah. But even in my crime fiction, it's very dialogue heavy, very action centric. So
It's
it could
very
easily be a
mystery.
movie or yeah.
That's how mysteries are.
Yeah.
I mean, some newer mysteries.
Yeah,
Older
exactly,
mysteries are
yeah.
more description heavy.
Yeah,
maybe.
that's true. Yeah. Well, it depends. Yeah, but yeah. So, but yeah, every story is so different. I mean, Kathy's story. I feel like almost Kathy's story is my favorite story, just because it's
Kathy, right?
so funny and so I don't know, and so like ironic too. Like there are a lot of, she's talking about racism, discrimination, all that stuff. But if you read it out of context, a lot of it, you might almost think she was being racist or something like that. So it's also very complex, even though it seems kind of straightforward. Yeah, just some of the lines in there, like I kind of astonished that I wrote them. I mean, it was just like they're really stick in your head, and it rhymes and everything. But it also has this spoken word aesthetic too. So it was like she in the book, in the book. All the characters are kind of selected because they're also great storytellers, so it's not shocking that they're telling great stories, for one thing, in terms of the realism element.
Right.
But they're also kind of challenging themselves too, because Kathy, for example, she's like a 21-year-old social work student, so she just graduated from college. She's very idealistic, and so she's done spoken word competitions, but she's never actually told a story in spoken word. I don't know if anybody has had. But that's her challenge in the book. So one of the things that you got in the book too is that them kind of preparing for the story. So what they're reading, what they're, how the drafts they're going through, and so that's part of the book too, to make it even more realistic. And so that's her challenge to herself, and my challenge to myself as the author over her, which is to write this story in a spoken word style. And it wasn't easy. I think that probably was written at maybe just one rewrite, but like for example, I think she was a little older in the first version, and so I sent it to a couple of people. One was a spoken word poet, one was a social worker, at least 2 people. I think more than that, but the one with spoken word said it was the initial draft wasn't spoken word enough alike, I guess. And so I made it a little bit more spoken word like. And so I also initially, it doesn't go directly into the story. It's kind of very much like commentary, very funny commentary, but I'm talking a lot about pop culture and stuff like that. So that was a kind of something I think probably going to change with each drafts. And then the other person, the social worker, said, I just feel she's a little bit younger than she, would have been having these kind of, I guess these sentiments, like these really
It
idealistic
sounded like a
sentiments.
young person's
Yeah.
sentiment more.
Yeah, so I think she was a little bit, no, she was like very old, she was still in her 20s, but it made her like right out of college so that she would be really idealistic, So yeah, so a lot of their comments also change the trajectory. So that's one of my favorite stories, just because of how funny it is, and because it really does like take the spoken word style and kind of makes it into a story, an entire story, which was challenging. Andrea's story is probably the most affecting, just because it's, this kind of like, features death and struggle with the virus itself. It's the only real story. I mean, there are elements of that in every story, but it's the only story that really focuses directly on struggling with the virus itself and people getting sick and dying and all that stuff. And it goes from multiple perspectives too. You got bus drivers and delivery people, and you get a doctor who's fighting for respirators and stuff like that. So it really tells that story. So that's a great story too. I think probably based on the reviews I got on it, that's probably people's favorite story. Certainly it's the most moving one. Ricard's story, it's very, he's got all this QAnon stuff with whatever, this conspiracy with the Freemasons and there's kind of like this thing about Pizzagate basically, but then you also get because of that you also get this kind of a lot of realistic stuff about people in the rural communities and how they're living and a lot of the struggles that they have with broken families and this and that, drug addiction, all opioids, whatever. And so you get this like rural urban divide like within this captivating narrative, and from somebody who's from the kind of quote unquote red area or whatever. So that's it was a challenge too, and I think it's also even though he doesn't mean it, I think you get something out of it in a way that the narrator doesn't necessarily intend you to get, which I think is unique too. And then the sixth story, let me think, what is the sixth story? Oh, Nalini's story, yeah, so that's a story from Nalini, who's like this privileged Indian American lawyer who kind of, the pandemic kind of made her see that she was like defending all these rich people and all this stuff, and she's like, I don't really want to do that with my life, why should I? And so, she kind of moves back, and then she sees this like biker, people she didn't even notice when she was like growing up in her privileged lifestyle in Fairfield, Connecticut or whatever. And so she's interested in the biker, Ricard in this book, and so she tells the story from the perspective of a teenager who gets involved with the biker, but then gets involved with his friends who don't like her because of her background and all this other stuff. So and that's probably, I think, the most emotionally charged in a sense, because you really get her like lovelorn feelings, and it's really, I think, really affecting in that way and really genuine, and the way she struggles with her path and everything else, and also this love affair, and then the conflict between that and her pleasing her parents, especially her father, and it's also got a trial format which is unique as well. So I think in some ways it's the most emotionally charged one. And then the stories in the second book are just as good, if not better. We have Haley's story about being a model. We have Pretext's story, which is kind of like a fusion between comedy and social commentary by being Indian, immigrant from India in America, and then also some of the stuff going on behind the scenes with the H-1B visas and stuff, and then also you get this kind of like Cape Fear type thing that develops into what you don't expect from the beginning. You have Kassan's story, which is just like a really kind of comic story, picturesque comic story. It's and so that was interesting to write. Manchurian Algerian, which is about a fashion icon, transgender fashion icon, and a lot of her struggles within the fashion world. And at least the story, which is kind of like the quote unquote Me Too story about a ballerina and her struggles in the art world. So each kind of story kind of involves a different world. You know, you have fashion, you have art, you have modeling, you have engineering and consulting, you have nursing. You know, so everyone kind of looks at the world from their own, usually professional perspective, and then you could also get the politics and the social stuff intertwined with that. And again, every story is a different style too, and you'll see that even more so in the second book. So, but yeah, it was a pleasure to write. Very difficult too, because it took me 5 years.
Congratulations on that. I just want to just quickly. Why do you call it Bad Americans? Is it because like there's like some, just like, I mean, like the construct of the reality show with the billionaire, it kind of like, he seems like easily stereotyped as a douche, you know, a little bit, because it's just like who invites people to like be in their special complex in the Hamptons. They must think a lot of themselves, you know, just like random people. I will bring the the peons to my whatever and do these weird. It's just, it's very weird, but I feel like there's reality shows out there that are like you're mixing some reality show stuff.
Yeah,
there.
so yeah, let me talk about a little bit more
Like
about
it's
the
like
reality
Love
show.
Island,
Yeah.
but with some more empathy. Like the shark, like that shark thing where she gets bit by the shark. I'm like, how is like this is your like property? How is she in the water with sharks? Why is that, like it just seems nuts, that part. Like, yeah, that seemed kind of satirical to me. Like making fun of it.
So there were different ways they could go with the billionaire. So he could either be like completely evil, like in this like what do you call that show? The one from Korea that really
I know what you're talking about
the rich people who just like take, you know, whatever, they're all like competing and they kill each other and all that stuff. So he would have been really Lord of the Flies in that sense, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted something a little bit where people were really complicated, including the billionaire. And so he's not, you know, straight up evil or anything like that.
No, I mean, it doesn't seem. I don't entirely. I'm like, what is his deal entirely? Like,
but yeah, I mean, the main you have. I think in the initial drafts, I think people commented that they didn't know why the characters were necessarily there. But I think that kind of came around in this new draft, and then you have a more of a sense of why the billionaire wants them there. And that's kind of resolved by the end, but you still have some questions, and then they get more resolved in the second book. But yeah, I mean, the reality show angle, I wanted it to feel like a reality show, but not actually be a reality show. Which I think I get that balance pretty well. So the other thing I could have gone is that just to make it a reality show, where they were actually filming a reality show, they were on film. And I didn't want to do that just because first of all, I didn't think it was so realistic, and I also I don't know, I didn't want to do that. Like I wanted it.
It kind of it reminded me of like, you know, like where they were like those movie pandemic sets where they were like all trapped there making a movie. There's a couple movies that came out after or during the pandemic where they're just like they're cloistered in some, you know, mansion or complex.
I wanted, you know, the other thing was because like I wanted there to be a tension where they're in the mansion together, but I didn't want it to make it where they're absolutely trapped in there either. Like they still have the option to get out, and there are periods where where you see that they could get out, and you know they one of the things that actually some people said was, oh well, you know, why not just make it during a fictional pandemic where it's a little bit more ominous or something like that. And you know, I mean, first of all, I mean, 1 million plus people died during COVID, so it's not like it wasn't ominous. And there was the first wave when people weren't leaving their houses and all that stuff.
Totally ominous.
Yeah, so why not just make it? And my thing is that I always try to make things realistic as possible. To the Bad Americans, the first book was Good Americans. So I just kind of wanted to call it Bad Americans, but on the other hand, you know, just like in the first book where you kind of question what is a good American, because you have all these different moral quandaries that come up in the stories wherever those people are from. In this book, you're kind of asking yourself, what's a bad American? Which person is a bad American? Are there any bad Americans?
People are complicated more than just saying they're good or bad. You know, they're more nuanced. But of course, there's some characters where I'm just like, what's your you're a prick or you're a bastard. You can that's how you feel about like some of them just like think they can do whatever they want and
Yeah, so you
Regardless of anyone's
in the
feelings.
typical reality show, you always have the bad person
That's
who's
right.
like, you know, like the villain
Just,
character.
You know, one's sleeping with everyone, or doesn't care, or just
Exactly, yeah. So even like The Bachelor or to the Big Brother, those are the two main realities. It
Right.
kind of
I guess.
reflects, right? Because they're dating each other. So there's a Bachelor, kind of Bachelor in Paradise, I guess more. And then you also have like the Big Brother aspect. So it's kind of touching on those, but they kind of keep talking about those tourists. So it's kind of like a parody or a satire of that. But again, unlike those shows, which are a lot not particularly deep, you have all these issues coming out, and you have, they're not just like fighting each other in terms of their personalities or whatever. They're all these things, baggage that they're bringing them to the set, quote unquote, based on their backgrounds and stuff. And so stuff that would never be touched on reality TV, like the racial stuff, or the social stuff, or the class divide, or the professional stuff. Like that stuff never really comes. Like, I've watched The Bachelor many times.
Except
Don't judge
maybe
me.
once in a while
But
we're
yeah.
yelling at each other over something, or
Yeah, or and there was the whole thing with The Bachelor with the racial stuff. There was a Black Bachelor, and then there was the thing that came out with the girl he selected and being like in some sorority that
Right.
whatever. So that stuff will come out occasionally, but it's not stuff that they really inject in the show per se.
No.
So so that's really the difference. It's kind of like a deep reality show, quote unquote.
Right.
So, so I wanted those aspects to be there, but not be in a box. Again, one part of the thing is with the books that it's never in a box. And if you read it, it's not. I think one reviewer said it's not cookie cutter at all. And it's not. I wanted it specifically to not be cookie cutter.
Right.
So you don't necessarily know where it's going. It's not. It's framed like, because reality shows are very like structured.
Scripted, yeah.
Very scripted, yeah. I mean, they're not supposed to be allegedly, but they are. So, like, how every episode is going to go to some extent, but you don't feel that way here. I don't think so. So yeah, it was something that I went through drafts and just trying to get the right balance of everything. I think I did, and yeah.
All right. Great. Anything else you want to address before we wrap
Yeah,
up?
I hope that I'm really happy about the reception it's gotten so far. As I said, it's gotten great reviews from Publishers Weekly, Kirkus.
Right, that's good stuff.
Yeah, it has great reviews on Amazon, on Goodreads, on NetGalley. So yeah, I'm really excited about coming out of the second book. I sent it out to many different awards and stuff. I'm hoping that will trigger stuff. But anyway, I just really want people to engage with it, get a sense of how complex the country is, and even as we're very divided,
Right.
on
We
many
agree on more
lines,
things than we think.
yeah, along many lines.
Right.
I think the point of the book is that, despite all that, and it really throws it in your face. And it's not sugarcoating anything,
Right.
But at the end of the day, we're still Americans. We're still have to live on the same earth together, and the pandemic just brought out a lot of the divisions, but it also showed the unity as well.
Right.
So that's really what I want people to get out of the book. I hope they'll read it, and I hope they'll get that. And there's a lot to talk about, but at the end of the day, I think that's the main thing you can get from it. So
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that with us.
thank you very much for having me.